Over 1 million people have viewed her TED Talk on the environment. She's the founder and director of Innovators and Disrupt Design, a creative force for positive sustainability-led change. Please give a huge welcome, not to the other person, but Leyla Acaroglu.
Thank you. Well, fortunately, I'm Australian, so I have a good sense of humour. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. So when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I decided that I wanted to be a designer and a sociologist. Designer because, well, you know, that sounded like fun, and you get to solve problems. And sociologist because I was like, how the hell do people work? We're so confusing. Does anyone else agree that humans are incredibly confusing? So I did that in a really strange roundabout order, and then did a PhD in how to make change in the world. And what I'm going to talk about today is how I think you can make change in the world. You can disagree or agree. That's how the world works. So let's go. All right, first of all, I like to create things. I've made a bunch of different things, from animations to games to interactive exhibitions. I run a school for adults. I like to make things that help people think differently about the way the world works. And the reason I do that is because I think that solving the world's problems should be fun and enjoyable, not depressing, and possibly make you want to get a drinking problem, which some of you might be too young to have yet. And I don't suggest it as an option, just saying. But ultimately, there's a lot of opportunity for sustainability to be leading us into a path of a future that we currently don't have on the table as far as the media says. And I believe that we can actually solve that. So let me go. I'm going to go fast. Yes, I have a TED Talk. You can watch it later. But let me go. Okay. What's in your toolbox for change? The reason I talk about this is because most of us, when we work in sustainability or social innovation, we don't think about what tools that we bring to the table. And I want to talk about 3 really critical thinking approaches that help people understand the way the world works, but then to also be able to apply their capacity to become actionists. And that is somebody who actively participates in the construction of the type of future that we want to live in. Not just somebody who actions it, but activates it. So let me talk about this toolbox. So there are 3 things that I think are really important. First of all, you have to understand that everything is constantly changing. We live in an incredibly complex ecosystem that is evolving every microsecond that we exist here. And humans are changing constantly. So change is a constant that we participate in whether we like it or not. So being able to understand the way these systems work, which is systems thinking, and being able to see how the life of the products and services that we interact with, and being able to design solutions that help overcome some of the problems that result from these issues. Everything is interconnected. We are in a constant state of universal flux. That was a 500th century BC philosopher called Heraclitus who said that. No man can ever step into the same river twice, meaning that everything is constantly evolving and changing. And in this constantly evolving space that we live in, it means that we can constantly intervene in that system. And if everything's interconnected, then we have the capacity to make small interventions that have big ramifications and outcomes. I have this thing about sustainability, though, and that is that when I'm doing this for a long time now, and I find that it's really funny when I ask people like what sustainability is, and they're like, oh, it's green and it's trees, and there's generally an evocative image of someone hugging a tree at some point, and I can tell you now, I've never hugged a tree in my life. Partly because I'm petrified of spiders, but that's because I'm from a country where they kill you. And also because I like silk clothes and I don't want to get all messy. So I'm like the only person who really cares about the planet who doesn't want to like hang out with trees. But I love trees, they're amazing. We have this symbiotic relationship with them where, you know, they create oxygen and stuff. But this concept of us being tree-hugging hippies who wear hemp clothes and don't shave our underarms ultimately is creating this frame or perspective that it's an opt-in option to care about the planet. But as we all know in this room, and I hope many other people outside of this room, that there are 3 basic ecosystem services that sustain life on Earth. We need food, air, and water. And for every time I hear anybody argue against sustainability as a good business decision, I'm like, okay, let's hold your breath for 60 seconds and see what happens. Because ultimately, the moment that you get to about 61 seconds, your body, your brain will automatically suck in oxygen because you are neurologically wired to survive. But the moment that that oxygen is gone, the moment that you are no longer able to breathe from this beautiful, incredible atmosphere that we exist within, you're screwed. Just FYI. So I feel that we should probably protect those systems and services. And this pragmatic approach to sustainability is a really big part of my message and the work that I do, because it's not an opt-in. It should be an opt-out. Like, oh, I don't care about the planet. I'm like, great, go move to Mars. It's really fun. I heard they have really, really nice landscaping. The problem that we have, though, is that as our interdependence requirements has grown as a species, as we've blossomed into an incredible amount of people living on this planet, being very successful, I might add, from an evolutionary perspective, our need has grown, but our understanding has diminished. We live in a time where the mainstream education system teaches reductionism, teaches this idea of siloed thinking. But we live in this dynamic, interconnected system, so one of the first things we need to do is to think differently. We need to undo the damage that reductionist thinking has done to us. And one of the things that I like to think about is sustainability taking away polar bears and any emotive construct of what it is. Think about it very pragmatically. What is it? We live on a planet that has finite resources. It tells us we have limits. There are constraints to the things we do. I mean, I would like to fly, but apparently that's not quite possible yet. Hoping for the future, and that we have systems, that we're dynamically engaged in systems. And these three things give us parameters to design solutions within. So ultimately, as I mentioned, finite planet, but we've started to extract and use resources at a rate far greater than the Earth can replenish. This is like the 101 on what we're trying to address. It's not just about solving one particular ecosystem destruction that we've caused as a result of our human activities. It's about understanding, as a species, how to live on this planet prosperously into the future, using the resources that have made our lives so incredibly wonderful. Just go and speak to your grandparent about what life was like, 90 years ago and see what they tell you. That ultimately we live in this incredibly prosperous time, but we've become immune to some of the impacts of those choices. Because everything has consequences. And this is the reality. Who here has had less than 3 cell phones in their life? There's like 3 of you. Great. The rest of you are like, who's had 5? Who's had 10? We go through cell phones at a rate of like 15 to 17 months on average. They've got up to 54 different minerals and metals inside them. Do you know how many countries have to be mined? How many processes go into the extraction? And all of the environmental and social impacts that occur across the entire life of those products that we ubiquitously buy, that we ubiquitously throw away, and that we still also then talk about how we can solve some of the problems. So consumerism is one of the critical issues that we face, but understanding consequences is part of that. So one of the big thinking approaches is this idea called life cycle thinking, which is understanding the holistic impacts of the things that we do. It's based on a nerdy scientific approach, but essentially the breakdown is that we look at the environmental impacts of a product, service, or system across its life, how it interacts with the economy. And we develop an understanding of the areas in which the most environmental impacts occur, based on a number of different indicators, and then we figure out how we could design better solutions. But the really cool thing about this is you can access the information on Google Scholar. Really, use Google Scholar. Your world will explode. Just type in Scholar into Google. You can thank me later. So we can figure out some really basic things. I'm going to bust some of those myths in a second, but first of all, really basic information. We always go back to the extraction of raw materials. We look at the way in which every single piece of material has been extracted from the natural environment and how that environment existed before we started taking things out of it. So what was the ecosystem before we started growing beef for leather, for example? Growing beef? Growing cows. You can grow beef on trees. Actually, you can grow beef in petri dishes. Okay, so extraction of raw materials first. Second, we have manufacturing, where we take those raw materials and we turn them into usable materials, and we put all the pieces together to create the products, so the cell phone. Packaging and transportation happens across the life of the product. I know I'm speaking fast, people. I'm hoping you can keep up. You got it? Keeping up? I'm watching a timer here. I got shit to get through. Okay, let's go. So, basically... All right, so here we are. So packaging and transportation. So everything that happens across the life of all the products. Use phase, that's where we all come in. End of life, we all know what happens at the end of life. Now I have a test for you all, and I want full participation because I can see all of you, just so you know. Okay, here, question. Pair of jeans. Everyone has jeans. If you have 3 main life cycle stages, if we say manufacturing includes the growing of the cotton, the extraction, the dyeing, and the processing, and then the use is us and end of life is when we waste it. Which is the biggest environmental impact? Pick one, I'm going to say it. Raise your hand. Who thinks it's manufacturing? Okay, about a third of the room, or a bit more than a third. Who thinks it's use? Okay, what about like 7 people? And who thinks it's end of life? Alrighty, so 7 people get some sort of reward that I don't have on me. It is the use phase and it's washing. Does anyone know why? Oh, look at that, collective penny drops in the room. It's not only the water, it's actually got to do with what we call the active use phase. So it's water and it's the energy required in order to run the washing machine. And this is an active product. It's also the detergents that are then wasted from the washing cycle. And so basically the use phase dominates the product's life. Now it doesn't mean that earlier on in the production process there aren't significant environmental impacts associated with the production of cotton and dyeing. It just means that we start to understand how products exist and how we can shift and alter the systems around them. So there's a number of dominant myths that perpetuate sustainability, which I think are really important to overcome because we want to be as productive and as efficient as possible to getting to the best outcome. So one is biodegradability is best. I will bust that in a minute. The second is humans act rationally. I don't have time to talk about that now, but come and find me later. It's fascinating. Cognitive dissonance. Humans, whew, very confusing bunch. Packaging has always been seen as the worst thing ever. Not so. No, not so. It turns out that packaging is good if it protects the product, if the product has high value. And then the other thing is sustainability costs more, which is just like what people perpetuate because they don't want you to do the good thing, or I don't know. It doesn't cost more unless you're doing it really badly. So here's an example. Coffee cups. Who here used a disposable coffee cup today? Come on, be honest. Okay, great. Well, you're along with the 58 billion coffee cups that are used annually in this country. 500 is the number of coffee cups an average New Yorker uses. Do the maths. There are 20 million trees required in a year to deal with coffee cups, and they're non-recyclable. Who knew that one? Good, you still use them. I feel guilt every time. So anyway, the reason they're non-recyclable is because the paper is actually lined with a plastic film so that, the coffee cup doesn't degrade in your hand as you're drinking hot liquid. And it's not recyclable because it's too expensive in order to extract a small amount of paper, which only can be recycled up to 5 times. And not to mention the fact that it's got coffee inside it, which then contaminates the rest of the paper. I took a photo of the recycling bin over there. You're all in trouble. It's filled with disposable coffee cups. So you all get like a -1 point for that. So ultimately, we have these myths that mean that it's better when it's not, and that means that we make these decisions, and we make these rash international decisions, and then psychologically, humans are like, I'm doing the right thing, it's paper, but we don't address the issue, which is disposability. And so what happens is when you have something biodegradable, like a paper cup, the element of it that's made out of cellulose fiber, when it ends up in a landfill environment, it does a doubly worse thing. And the way it works is this, is that when something natural degrades in the environment, many of you who are scientists will know this, the cellulose, the cells that were previously stored in carbon as it was growing, I love this, it's like a pantomime. So as it was growing, basically then just degrade naturally with oxygen, re-release the carbon, it's the carbon cycle. However, when you go and put something organic in a landfill environment, it actually does something completely different because it's anaerobic, meaning it lacks oxygen, it's tightly compacted and hot. Who's hung out at a landfill, by the way? Yeah. Okay, cool, we can talk later. First-hand experience, love it. But also why. But interesting life choices. So ultimately, what happens is it produces, and I'm going to say it with the Australian accent, methane, which many people are like, what is that? And for the American translation, it's methane, which is a 25 times more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So I call this a double negative. We think we've done the right thing, we've put a new product in place, we've removed something else from the system that we thought was bad, in this case styrene cups, and we've actually just displaced the environmental impact to somewhere else in the cycle. Holy shit, I've got 6 minutes. Okay, so we all got this, right? Okay, so essentially we construct solutions that are based on a linear system, and that linear system says like, well, we'll put something in here and it'll come out there and everything will be fine. And it just completely disregards the fact that we live in this 3-dimensional, dynamic, evolving system, and that things move and shift through it. And that one decision over here will have an impact over there. And so ultimately what we want to get to is we want to get to designing solutions and products, innovations that come to creating regenerative systems. Systems that not only are sustainable, but they're regenerative. And I feel that this is an amazing aspiration to get to. And we've got a little bit of time, not a huge amount, but we've got a lot of smarts, which is a really cool thing. And I feel that if we invested our collective intellectual capacity on figuring out how the world works, understanding the systems, and designing interventions that effectively create solutions rather than just displacing them elsewhere, will be really, really cool. So I'm in that camp. I don't know about you guys. I feel like many of you are. Jonathan is. He's like, I've been on that camp for so long. She's speaking my language. I'm a big fan, Jonathan, FYI. Yeah, nerd. Anyway, moving right along. So what was I saying? What was I talking about? I forgot. I got a little starstruck. Jonathan. I only got 5 minutes left. Oh, God. Okay. I've only gotten through one of them. I haven't even gotten through systems thinking yet. All right, we're going to go even faster. Are you ready? Whew. All right, okay, so we live in these complex systems, and our job is to actually figure out how to put the pieces back together and what the pieces mean. So ultimately, people avoid trying to understand systems because they look at this pile and they're like, holy shit, what is that? But ultimately, we know that once you put a jigsaw puzzle together, it makes sense. So we need to figure out ways of making it work. Donella Meadows, amazing woman, she described systems in this beautiful way. And if we understand systems, the systems that are at play in the world, Leyla, get that word out, we can start to figure out how the way in which we can create whole system solutions. So I like to break it down like this. There are three main systems at play. There are people, the social systems, education, law, all the things that we made up as a species to make it easy for us to live. And then we have the industrial system, the way in which we made things like our cell phones that we're all addicted to, let's admit it, and we ultimately created all of these product services and material things like these chairs and our clothes, and they all facilitated the human systems. But both of these two systems are dynamically, interdependently reliant on the ecosystem. The natural services and systems feed the other two, and it will be fine without the other two. Trust me, nature's not all like cell phones. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. We didn't ask. We haven't had an adequate response yet. Okay, so basically design, okay. So, we got it. Life cycle thinking, you got it? Locked in. Systems thinking, this is starting to build a three-dimensional framework here, people. The next thing is to understand that design is the silent social scripter that influences your lives every single second of them. From the way you sit on this chair, to the glasses that help you see, to the phone and how you hold it, to the hunchbacks we're all becoming because we stare at our phones all the time. Design is intentionally influencing your life, whether you like it or not. It's an incredibly powerful force, and it's not used incredibly well. So I believe that design and the approach to creative problem solving can be used in an incredibly powerful way to help solve some of the issues. Let me give you the example of food waste. Who's working on food waste? Okay, cool, all right. Not the people who are hanging out at landfill sites, that's interesting. Okay, so we know that 8% of the world's global CO2 emissions are contributed by food waste. It's a really big problem. In the US, we waste up to $160 billion of food each year. And if you think about where that's occurring, at what life cycle intervention point in the life of the food, most of it happens in the home, a large percentage of it, and I blame it on the refrigerator. Because these things are designed to keep food fresh. It's their primary function. And we all know how sad limp carrots are. Yes, it's a collective pain point. No one eats the soggy lettuce, for God's sake. There's a report that came out in the UK called the Soggy Lettuce Report. Anyway, the thing is that these things have not changed their design in over 50 years. The construct of a refrigerator to take up all of this real estate in our houses is to keep food fresh. But the crisper drawer, the thing you put your vegetables in, is not designed as a closed environment, and so it dries out, just like your skin on an aeroplane. And so what happens is it slowly starts to lose its moisture in the cells, they collapse, and they get sad and pathetic. But this is a very simple design intervention. If you want to solve this problem, get a Tupperware container with the little lock sides. You will have broccoli fresh for like 3 weeks. It'll change your life. I promise. Anyway, I'm running out of breath. I've only got a minute left. Okay, so a lot of those design system failures, which is where we thought we had a good idea and we put it in place and we went about our lives and nobody ever questioned why it was like that, because design is supposed to be ubiquitous. But a hero of mine, Buckminster Fuller, refers to if you want to change the system, you don't just iterate on the current, you design the new system that makes the old one obsolete. And that's the thing about design and innovation, is what happens is new designs come in and they just shift out the old ones. It's a normative shift because people are like, oh, iPhones, I don't want a Nokia anymore. Yeah, that happened, right? And in systems thinking, we always talk about how today's problems were often yesterday's solutions. And this is a considerable issue that we face, is that we use the same thinking that got us here to try and solve the problems. And then we have these unintended consequences or rebound effects, things that happen somewhere else. And so, I'm not going to get this. Okay, so one of the examples was whether or not they introduced, introducing biofuels in the European Union to reduce dependency on fossil fuels was a good idea. And what we found out was actually no, because a few years later there was a world food crisis because the land that was currently used to farm corn and other base food food crops became biofuel crops. And so what happened is that there were many people around the world who were then not able to access base food crops. This has shifted, and it doesn't mean that biodiesels are the worst thing, it's just the systems need to be taken into consideration. You're going to have to give me 1 extra minute, people. I lost a minute because they're, okay. I was trying. Got 10, 9, right? We can count down and then I can have a breath. I love breathing. It's really good. Thanks. All right, let me do this last bit. So how do we make change? How do we design change? Well, here's the deal, right? The thing about design is that we just love to fail. That's what we do in design. We iterate, we test, we explore. We're like, how do we break this and make it better? And this is the thing that we've lost in this linear kind of reductionist thinking, is the ability to iterate, explore, test, and redesign the systems that are around us. So, a really critical thing is that we don't change behavior, we change conventions. We change new norms, and these are happening constantly. If we look at the shift, the rapid technological shift in the way that's influenced society, we have the ability to create new types of services and products that don't even have to be all like, oh, so it's really sustainable. No, it's just just makes sense. And that's really where design can come in as an amazing platform. But I guess the biggest thing for me is how you actually become a really informative disruptor, someone who understands the system and knows where to intervene. And in order to do that, you need to become a systems pioneer, someone who understands the way the world works, rather than assumes that you know how it works. Because this is one of the big problems, an assumption, rather than curiosity and inquiry into its mechanics and the mechanisms that are at play around us. Don't fall into status quo bias. Don't feel like you have to maintain the status, because the status is basically just bullshit. And ultimately, it perpetuates the problem. So I believe that we should always be pushing at the boundaries. We should be pioneers. We shouldn't just be innovating. We should be figuring out ways of making the old things obsolete and designing things that were previously never thought of. Sorry for those trying to take photos. I'm going down. And that really critically, you need to embrace a flexible thinking approach, because understanding the world is three-dimensional and how we exist within it, and spending time growing a sphere of influence as you progress throughout your life is a really empowering approach, right? Rather than seeing the system as basically some big monolithic structure that disempowers you as a human and that you probably should just get a drinking problem. No, don't go that way. Go down the I have the capacity as an educated, intellectual human to figure out how the world works and intervene it in selectively constructive and beautiful ways that create regenerative solutions, because that is the way the world works. And I'm not going to say that. And I'm going to then just say we need pioneers who are figuring out how to lead systems change. And so I ask, which one of you is that? And I will leave you on that note. And that was my last slide. Thank you.